They began appearing in late 1774. Young men found at desks, in rented rooms, in fields outside Leipzig. Many wore a blue coat and a yellow vest. Many had a book open beside the body. Some had passages underlined. None of them had ever met the author. By 1778, the count was in the hundreds. It would never be exact. No one in Europe had ever seen anything like it. This is the Werther Effect. It has been measured for 250 years. It still works on the people reading this sentence. The novel was The Sorrows of Young Werther. The author was Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. He had written it in 4 weeks, at 24 years old, drawn from his own unhappy love and from the recent death of a friend, a young legation secretary named Karl Wilhelm Jerusalem, who had shot himself with borrowed pistols in 1772 over a woman married to someone else. The story was simple. A sensitive young man falls in love with a woman engaged to someone else. He cannot have her. He writes letters to a friend describing his decline in beautiful, almost luxurious detail. In the final pages, he dresses in a blue coat and yellow vest, sits down at his desk, and shoots himself in the head with a borrowed pistol. It became one of the most widely read books in Europe within months. Goethe became famous overnight. So did the deaths. Reports came from Leipzig, from Berlin, from Vienna, from Copenhagen, cities Goethe had never visited, describing young men he had never met, dying in ways that read like quotations from his book. Estimates of the dead range from several hundred across Europe to over 1,000. No exact count was ever made. No exact count would have been possible. The novel was banned in Leipzig, in Copenhagen, in parts of Italy, in cities across the German states. Not for what it said, for what was happening to the people reading it. Goethe lived another 58 years. He never wrote anything quite like it again. He had stumbled into something that would not stay in the 18th century. For 200 years, what had happened around the novel was treated as a literary curiosity, a grim coincidence, a fluke of the Romantic Age. The novel was studied as literature. The deaths were footnotes. Then in 1974, someone proved it was a law. An American sociologist named David Phillips pulled American mortality records from 1947 to 1968, 21 years of death certificates, and compared them to the front pages of the New York Times. Every time a suicide had been reported prominently in the paper, he searched the weeks that followed for what the numbers said. The result was always the same: a widely reported death, a spike within 3 to 6 weeks, same demographic as the original, same method. The size of the spike was proportional to the size of the coverage. He published his findings in 1,974 inches, the American Sociological Review. He gave the mechanism a name, the Werther Effect. What Goethe had done by accident, Phillips had proven by statistic. The mechanism would not stop scaling. Each time a new medium emerged, powerful enough to carry it, the same pattern reappeared. Only the vehicle changed. On the night of the 4th of August, 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her Brentwood home from an overdose of barbiturates. She was 36 years old. By morning, her face was on the front page of every newspaper in the United States. The coverage was unprecedented. Reporters described the dose. They photographed the empty pill bottles. They diagrammed the position of her body. In the 30 days that followed, suicide rates in the United States rose by 12%, almost 200 additional deaths, most of them by overdose, most of them women in their 30s. It was the largest single spike ever recorded in connection with a death in the news. Until 2014, on the 11th of August 2014, the actor Robin Williams was found dead in his California home. The news traveled within hours. Every newspaper, every television channel, every social media platform carried his face. The details of his method, the precise timing, the rooms. A study published in PLOS One 4 years later documented what came next. In the 5 months following his death, suicides in the United States rose by 9.85%. That was 1,841 additional deaths. The largest increase was among men aged 30 to 44. The largest increase by method matched his exactly, up by 32%. The people who died had grown up watching him. He had narrated their childhoods. He was the voice of the genie. He was the teacher in the poetry class. He was the doctor in the red nose. And then he was gone. A face that had been close to them for 30 years had used a method and named it as a way out. 3 years later, the mechanism completed its evolution. On the 31st of March 2017, Netflix released a 13-episode series called 13 Reasons Why. The final episode contained a 3-minute scene depicting, in explicit detail, the death of a high school student named Hannah Baker. The show was not advertised on the news. It did not require anyone to watch a broadcast. It appeared in the homepage recommendations of every Netflix subscriber under the age of 18. A study published in JAMA Psychiatry in 2019 measured what followed. In the month after the show's release, suicide rates among Americans aged 10 to 17 rose by 28.9%. The largest single-month spike on record for that age group. An estimated 195 additional adolescent deaths in the months that followed. 2 years later, Netflix quietly edited the scene out of the episode. By then, the mechanism had completed its evolution. It no longer needed a printed book passed between readers. It no longer needed a national news cycle to broadcast a death. It needed an algorithm. The people who died were no longer people who had sought the story out. They were people the platform had decided would like it. The recommendation engine, optimized for watch time, had no way of distinguishing a vulnerable teenager from any other viewer. The legitimization arrived in the recommendations row, between a cooking show and a comedy. It arrived without being asked for. The obvious reading of all of this is that vulnerable people imitate what they see, that the problem is exposure, that if the wrong story reaches the wrong person, they copy it. That reading is wrong. The people who died after Werther had not been planning to read Werther. The people who died after Marilyn had not all been her fans. The people who died after Robin Williams were largely men who had never met him. The teenagers who died after 13 Reasons Why had not asked for the recommendation. Imitation requires intent. There was no intent. There was no decision to copy. What there was, in every single case, was something quieter and more disturbing. The wound was already there. The methods were already known. The means were already accessible. The despair was already present in the population, distributed silently across millions of lives that nobody was tracking. What the story did, what every story has done, from a 1,774 novel to a 2017 streaming series, was not to plant something new. It was to give permission. Werther didn't put the gun in their hand. He just showed them they were already holding it. The mechanism is not imitation. It is legitimization. Every documented case follows the same logic. A respected, beloved, or relatable figure performs the act. The act is then publicly named, mapped, and tied to a recognizable identity. And in the days that follow, the people who had been holding the option without language for it suddenly have a model, a face, a method, a permission. The story does not create the desire. It tells the desire it is allowed. Almost no one knows the second half of this research. What happens next is on us.